Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're excited to launch this new program, Causal Research on the Criminal Justice System. My name is Maya. I'm a program assistant at the Russell Sage Foundation.
Hi, my name is Stephen Glauser. I'm the Senior Program Officer of this program at the Foundation.
Before we really get into things, a few housekeeping notes. As you've heard, this meeting's being recorded. We ask that you use Zoom's question and answer function for questions. We'll have a section for Q&A at the end, but please refrain from asking specific project-related questions. Those you can send to us at programs@rsage.org, and you can also email us if we aren't able to get to your question at the end of the talk. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what RSF is, what's the Russell Sage Foundation. We're going to go over our overall funding priorities and then move more specifically into the causal research on the criminal justice system application process, eligibility, the review timeline, and application materials that you may need. The Russell Sage Foundation, we're pretty old. We were founded in 1907 by Margaret Olivia Sage, who's the widow of Russell Sage, for the improvement of social and living conditions in the United States. Between 1907 and 1944, we were providing direct institutional support and making reports for private social agencies on topics like poverty reduction, social work, labor reform, housing, public health, etc. Since 1945, we pivoted to funding basic social science research. We aim to strengthen the methods, data, theoretical core of the social sciences, mainly sociology, political science, economics, and psychology, as a means of better documenting and understanding some of the nation's most pressing social, political, and economic problems. In order to do that, we have two main funding mechanisms, our research grants and our early career grants. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about these, but as an overview, our core research grants are most of what we do. We divide these up into our trustee grants and our presidential grants based on the budget. Presidentials run up to $75,000. Trustee grants run from $75,000 to $200,000. Our trustee grants are approved by the Board of Trustees. Our presidential grants are approved by the president. For both of these, it's a two-step application process. So you submit an LOI and then a proposal. Eligibility, we require the main PI to have a PhD, and these grants run up to 2 years. The next deadline will be July 16th. We also have a number of early career grants. Most recently, we had a deadline for our dissertation research grants. These are 1-year grants, 15,000 max for our ABD PhD students at US institutions. We also have a pipeline grants competition. These are 1-year grants up to 35,000 for individuals, 50,000 for teams, offered to non-tenured early career academics except postdocs. Applications for those are open every fall. The next deadline is in October. The focus of this webinar today will be on our new program, which is Causal Research on the Criminal Justice System. These are 1-year grants up to 100,000 for tenure track assistant professors at US institutions. And the upcoming deadline is next month, April 3rd. In addition to our grant making, we also offer 2 fellowships, the Visiting Scholars Program and the Visiting Researcher Program. These are an opportunity to come to the Russell Sage Foundation in New York for a year or for a semester and spend the time working on a book project or a series of papers from the Foundation's offices and in a cohort of fellow scholars. The Visiting Scholars Program offers financial support. It's a 10-month in-residence fellowship that you apply for the following academic year. So this June's deadline will be accepting applications for September 26th to June 2027. Our Visiting Researcher Program does not come with financial support, but it's a 5-month in-residence fellowship from September to June, so either the fall semester or the spring semester, and you apply for this in the same year as you'd like to come, so this May's deadline is for residency this fall or next spring. Uh, for these, we do require a PhD or a career in peer-reviewed scholarly research. It's a one-step application. You just submit a proposal, and it's approved by the RSF Board of Trustees. So what kind of research do we fund? We have four main core program areas: behavioral science and decision-making in context, social, political, and economic inequality, future of work, and race, ethnicity, and immigration. Behavioral science and decision-making in context evolved from a long-standing program in behavioral economics to encourage economists and non-economists to study economic, social, political, psychological decision-making processes, attitudes, behaviors, practices. For this program, we like the most successful applications have relevance to our other programs that are listed on this slide. So we also have future of work. That's things like labor market outcomes, including but not limited to AI, effects of the minimum wage, unionization, worker power, etc., social, political, economic inequality. We're interested in very broadly things that contribute to social, political, economic inequalities in the US. Our race, ethnicity, and immigration program used to be two separate programs: cultural contact and immigration. It's interested in how we integrate new populations into the US, how we interact with each other. We do have some restrictions on the topics that we fund. We don't fund studies on health outcomes as the primary outcome or measure of interest. We don't fund studies on educational processes, teacher outcomes, curricular development. Sometimes we're interested in these sort of the closer that the students get to the workforce. Later on at college, post-college, things like that. We don't fund studies on subjects outside the United States of America, and we don't fund operational support, individual program evaluations, animal studies, things like that. We have two special initiatives. The first is immigration and immigrant integration. This is co-funded with the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Pretty similar to our race, ethnicity, and immigration core program. And then we have a second with a really long title that's basically looking at the effects of the 2023 Supreme Court decision that banned race-conscious college admission policies. So what are the effects of banning of affirmative action? That is a new program we launched last year.
All right, I'll chat a little bit about the reason that you all are here today, talking about this new initiative on causal research on the criminal justice system. We've already said the deadline's next month, April 3rd. This is essentially a new program co-funded with the Arnold Ventures, and so we are particularly interested in specifically causal research on the criminal justice system. RSF has funded a lot of research on criminal justice, primarily through our inequality program or our race, ethnicity, immigration program, and also some in our behavioral sciences program. But this is pulling together a specific body of work where we are using causal methods to look at that. We've already sort of gone over a bunch of this stuff, but I do want to note that you can use the funds for summer salary, course buyouts, conference travel, research assistance, things like data acquisition, where you have to pay data access fees, or data collection if you're doing an experiment and you need the funds to do the experiment. I do want to note we don't need a budget at the time of application. A little bit more about this program is that it comes with a mentorship component and a capstone conference. So those who are funded are going to be matched with senior scholars in the field who usually have a close topical and methodological match to the research being done. We are generally asking the mentors to meet with the grantees monthly and be responsive to emails. They can read drafts of your work. They can talk about research design issues. We also want them to be a sort of another person not at your institution, a new person to your network maybe, to talk about general career questions, things like my chair is asking me for a lot of service requirements. I'm already swamped with those. How often can I say no to that before it becomes a problem for my tenure review? That's a great question to ask someone maybe not at your department. The way that works is the applicant will suggest some mentors. Our reviewers and advisory committee will also suggest some mentors. I'll take all of those brainstorms named together, come up with a short list, and then approach that. See if you have the grantee has any objections to that, and then reach out to those folks to ask them to participate. Um, Additionally, we have a capstone conference at the end of the grant period where the cohort will present their work to each other and to some other senior scholars. The mentors often are invited, and we'll have discussants available as well. A lot of this work is in progress. Folks, even though these are one-year projects, they don't necessarily get finished in that year, but it's a great time to get feedback. It's almost like a workshop in that it's not necessarily like critiquing each other's work so much as like, here's how you can strengthen your work. We try to build in ample time for networking and socializing as well. Big question that we've gotten that I'd like to address is, what does RSF consider to be a causal research method for this program? And these are just some examples, but essentially we're looking for research design that can isolate a treatment effect of a policy, a practice, or some kind of intervention. We recognize that these are $100,000 grants, so you're not going to be doing a huge RCT with that amount of money. But like you could consider piloting an RCT. We could look at various diff designs, regression discontinuity designs, or instrumental variables designs. We just want the causal research method to be the main research method being used in the proposal. We are open to mixed methods research things that have a qualitative component. For example, if you're running an RCT and then doing some interviews of a subgroup of the folks in the experiment, that's fine as long as the causal design is central to the project. What can happen if a project gets submitted to this that we think might be a good fit for RSF generally. Like I said, we've been funding existing work in the criminal justice space, but we don't think it's necessarily the causal part isn't central enough. We may divert your project to our existing funding streams. That means those things that Maya discussed earlier, we might consider you as a presidential grant or something like that. If, say, we look at your project and say, this is really a qualitative project dressed up as a way that may be submitted to this when they should have submitted to one of RSF's other existing programs. When you submit, we basically ask for just a couple things. We ask for a proposal narrative and then your CV. So we don't ask for a lot. You also have to fill out a quick form. But in that proposal narrative, and I'll note that we get all sorts of different formats. There's no specific way that this has to be designed, but the types of things that we're interested in are some kind of introduction and problem statement, why this is an important thing to study, why the Russell Sage Foundation should be interested in this. We want to see a pretty clear research question and hypothesis. We generally think of the best proposals are question-driven. And as opposed to something like, oh, I have these data, I'll go look around and see if I can figure something out in these data. No, we want you to have the question first, hypothesis, and that you've then identified the correct data and methods to answer the question you're posing. You should also have a literature review. It's great for us to understand that you know where you sit in the literature, you know the sort of theoretical background that you're bringing to this project. And if you have any preliminary analyses, things like tables, charts, from some early preliminary work, those things are great to include if you have them, if it's possible to have them. An example might even be if you have a survey, show us that you've pre-tested the instrument, show us that there's sort of a proof of concept. All of those things are good. I will say that you have limited space, so there's an opportunity cost to including something. And if you, that means if you don't, if you include something, you have to take something out. So we don't need a lot on the budget. An example of this is at the time of submission, we need you to say, I am asking for $100,000 for participant incentives, research assistance, summer salary, and conference travel, period. That would be perfectly sufficient. Like a big ticket like number, and then a couple buckets of the examples of that you're using it in. What we are going to do is we're going to ask only those who are who make it through the review process. And we'll ask those folks to submit detailed budgets, and we'll ask you for those details later on in the process. Don't give us too much on investigator qualifications. We're going to look at your CV to see if you've done something like this before. I'll say the one caveat to this is if this is a new thing that you haven't published in, or there's no evidence on your CV that you've done something like this before, but say you've taken a training or you've done some work in this space that maybe isn't showing up on your CV, you can maybe explain that a little bit. But in general, don't waste like half a page. We'll see half a page or a page dedicated to investigator qualifications, and that's really going to limit you from including the details that we're more interested in, which is really things about the research design. Finally, if you've submitted to other places like NSF, you'll know that they include a section on broader impact, and those are required in an NSF proposal. And we see proposals to the Russell Sage Foundation where folks have clearly copied and pasted a previously existing NSF proposal and kept that section, or a section on specific policy relevance or something like that that other funders require. We don't really require a section like that. If you have policy implications, you can mention them or something like that. But like, again, don't include a whole bunch on that at the expense of the details we need to evaluate the quality of your research design and its fit for the question that you're posing. I alluded to this a little bit earlier. There's just a couple things we need for you to submit. We need you to fill out the application via Flux, which is our grants management platform. We need a proposal narrative, which is allowed to be up to 10 pages single-spaced. This does not include references. So if your references are 3 pages, that's okay. They do not count towards the 10 pages. And an abbreviated CV, please limit it to 5 pages. We don't need to read through your entire unedited CV. We just don't have time given the number of applications we expect to get. I will note that it's good to register for our Flux platform ahead of the deadline, because each registration needs to be approved by an employee here at the foundation. If you wait till last minute, you run the risk of them not being able to do it before the due date. So do it ahead of time. Check out the questions. We have some basic demographic info. We want to know some basic filtering things like what research method you're going to use, what sort of data sources you're thinking of, et cetera. Those are helpful in a questionnaire. But the meat and potatoes of this is going to be your proposal narrative. Just to give you an overview of how we're going to review these. First, they're going to come through an internal staff review. You can think of us as sort of journal editors. We're going to be doing desk rejects, and we'll talk about how we make those decisions later. If any that make it through that process are going to go out for external peer review, and we're going to match those sort of like topically, methodologically. We don't have a standing panel of reviewers who are going to see everything. Each proposal is going to get sort of like a little custom panel based on the topic, the data being used, the research methodology, et cetera. If you are positively reviewed, you will be asked to respond to those reviewer comments, sort of like a quick, oh, reviewer 1 had these concerns. Maybe you didn't have space in the proposal to address them, and that gives you that ability. Those responses, reviews, the full proposals go to our advisory committee, and they read that whole package, and they help us sort of rank the proposals and say, these are the ones who are above the bar, these are the ones that are below the bar. And you will find out if you get funded in July. If you were rejected at the desk reject stage or earlier, you will find out earlier than July. At that point, we will ask for the budget, additional things like IRB approval or IRB exemption, proof of data access, et cetera. And then we will send your institution a grant agreement. And we are aiming for start dates for these grants in October of 2025. That again would mean that we would then have a conference for this first cohort in fall 2026. It has not yet been scheduled. These are the examples of some of those things that I mentioned. We need a budget narrative, IRB, data access, pre-registration for proof of pre-registration for your experiment. All of this is before we would release any funds.
So the first step when you submit an application to us is that it will undergo internal review, where we will screen it for programmatic fit for RSF, and if it's at an appropriate stage of development. Some common reasons why proposals are screened out during this project is that the first is that they're just not a good fit for us. They're not focused on the US or a social science project. They're seeking operational support, a program evaluation, animal studies, a documentary, things like that. Or the outcomes are not of interest to the foundation, so their health or mental health or education outcomes. We also receive projects that lack sufficient detail, so there's not really enough for us to evaluate the methodology and see if it's a match for the research questions. Occasionally, the lit review will cite solely from one discipline. As we're an interdisciplinary foundation, we'd like to see citations from multiple disciplines. Other possible reasons are lack of clarity, too vague, there are design flaws, the methods aren't suited for the research questions. Um, we prioritize projects with strong research designs, so not so much a project that is says, I already have this data, I just sort of want to noodle around and see what I could find. And then sometimes, depending on our funding capacity, if we have an application that's already receiving a large amount of support and the project would happen without RSF funds, we screen those out as well, depending on the overall pool that we receive.
So for the external review process, like I mentioned before, you'll be each proposal is matched with folks topically, methodologically, familiarity with the data source, et cetera. And basically, we are asking external reviewers the following questions. Are these important and compelling research questions? Is the hypothesis like appropriately supported in terms of prior theory and empirical work? Is the research design or the data and methods appropriate to address those questions? Do you have this sufficient power to answer the questions in a causal way? Then we ask, does the PI have the qualifications, or do they need a consultant, or would we suggest potentially adding on another PI or something like that? We ask generally, what's the likely contribution of the project? Is this gonna be the most widely cited paper ever? It's a completely new area of research that has opened up, et cetera, and it's going to win the Nobel Prize? Or is it like unlikely to be published in any interesting journal that can sort of run that table? And then we also ask them to comment on ways that the project could be strengthened. And so that's a way that can also be helpful, and why we often ask for folks to respond to comments. If you get positive reviews, we ask you to respond specifically so that we can have the sort of answers to some of these queries in hand when we are making our decisions with the advisory committee.
Some tips and suggestions for your application as you're putting it together. Number one, make sure it's a fit for RSF and for this particular call for proposals. Your research questions should drive the proposal. Balance the narrative between your literature review and your description of the research design. Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, all good. Your research design, your methodology, your plan for analysis. We don't need a ton on your qualifications as we have your CV, and we also don't need a super detailed budget description at the time of application, as you'll have time to submit that later on in the process. Provide sufficient information so we can evaluate the application. Don't overpromise or exaggerate what your project will be able to tell us, and show an understanding of the strengths and limitations of your research design. If you're asked to respond to reviews, do so seriously, graciously, and in depth. Our reviewers have taken the time to offer you feedback on your proposal, and that's always a good thing. Please check the website and FAQs. If you aren't able to find an answer to your question, we're always happy to answer an email if you send it to programs@rsh.org. Make sure you submit on time. We have a 2 p.m. deadline for all of our applications. And if you're having technical issues, we're available to help with that. You need to register and create an account on the Flux portal more than 48 hours in advance, as we process those by hand. And lastly, we receive a lot more good proposals than we're able to fund based on our capacity. So learn from the reviews and try again if you have a project that you think fits.
Great. This is just a sort of last note to let you know, I guess our communications department and our publications department would be mad if I didn't mention these. Russell Sage publishes an open access, interdisciplinary, topic-based, peer-reviewed journal. Go read it, download it, cite it, etc. It's available at rsfjournal.org. And we have a repository of data sets or links to data sets. They're often stored elsewhere, like ICPSR, etc., that have been produced through RSF funding. That's available at russellsage.org/datasets. And as always, the most up-to-date place to find our deadlines are on our website at this place here. Um, and that's most of our spiel. I see that there's a bunch of questions, so we'll start to get to those. But I just want to say, if we don't get to your question, or like we've mentioned previously, if you have a specific question about if your project is a good fit or something like that, you don't have to take up everyone's time on the webinar. You can email us a little abstract or a little couple questions at programs@rsage.org, and we can get to them. So I do want to get to a couple of the questions in the Q&A that I think might be relevant to a bunch of people. The first is if we require letters of support for potential mentors that are listed. The answer is no. You could just list some names of some folks that you've cited before that you dreamt of working with or something like that. That's all fine. And are we open to multiple PIs on these projects as long as they're both sorry, the answer there is yes, we're open to multiple PIs. If your co-PI is an associate professor, they are ineligible to receive funding on the project. So they cannot get summer salary or something or a course buyout, but they can receive other support in the form of like, oh, they're at this other institution and they would like to get a research assistant. We can provide funding for them. We have a question about if you have a whole research agenda that fits within the topic, should you describe the whole agenda or focus on just one project? I would please focus on just the project that you are planning to do in the 1 year. You can sort of allude to the larger research agenda in that sort of similar to how a lot of journal articles have that, like, in future work I will ... You can include something like that to give us that context that let us know you're thinking about these problems and have longer term plans. But when you were talking about the details of the research design, please think about this as a 1 year project in scope, or in reality, what if everything goes to plan, what you could do in 1 year. We're perfectly aware that during the course of research, hiccups happen, like access to data problems or recruitment problems or something like that, that turn these quote unquote 1 year projects into 2 year projects or something like that. But theoretically, you should be able to do this in 1 year if everything goes right. We have a question about tables included in the proposal and whether they count towards the page count. We allow for a 1-page appendix for a tables or charts. If you are including more than that, they are going to count towards the page limit. But for those first, if you just have a couple tables or a table and a chart or a table and a figure, you can go onto a 1-page appendix and that is fine. We have some question whether or not we have flexibility about the course release budget. Given the huge heterogeneity in course release prices, it's a sort of a maybe. This is actually really good feedback because we will be able to talk about this at the budget stage. So this is sort of on a case-by-case basis, an unknown right now. It may be that we do have flexibility, and we're sort of in a data collecting phase for course buyouts, because some institutions only charge the funding institution the cost of an adjunct replacement, and other institutions charge the full cost of that professor's time. So we're sort of still trying to figure that out. I would say put a pin in that. Unfortunately, I can't give you a hard answer right now. Can you submit 2 proposals using the same preliminary data as long as they're on it's going to be 2 different studies? I would say please email us with more information, but my initial reaction is probably yes. As it depends on how different the projects, the studies are that you're proposing is sort of the real answer there. If we think that they're too related, we might rather have seen them submitted as a single proposal. But if they are actually 2 very different projects, then you can probably submit 2. We have a question about a co-author in Canada. This is again a sort of it depends. I don't think we would be able to provide them funds as a consultant or as a co-PI, but I do think we would be able to provide support for them, similar to what I said earlier for associate professors. So something like an RA at their institution or something like that. But again, really at the initial stage, the budget's not a huge concern. I realize that may determine whether you are interested in applying or not. I think the answer is probably going to be we can give them some support, but not the same level of support as folks at U.S. institutions. Um, we have a question about whether you can submit an LOI at next week's LOI deadline and one of these. As long as it is not the same project, the answer is yes. You can submit an LOI on a different project and then submit this a project to this program. That's fine. Um, oh, a question about where you, depending on tenure status. If you're currently going up for tenure, I would suggest that you apply because we often determine eligibility based on the time of application. It may happen that we, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes we will transfer things over to Russell Sage's existing program areas. And so if we see that, oh, this person is going up for tenure and is going to be an associate professor starting in the fall, we may move you over to our regular program areas. That's sort of again, it depends. It also depends on the number of applications we get, whether we consider diverting a lot of things over to other things, or whether we want to consider them under this specific initiative. So that, sorry, it's not a more specific answer, but it really isn't. It depends. Um, we have a question about will grants be offered for future cohorts? Yes, we're planning on having at least 3 rounds of this. So the next couple this year, we would probably have another deadline next spring and then one spring after that. After that, we don't know, but we have a pot of money set aside for at least 3 rounds. And we have a similar question about collaboration with faculty at non-US institutions. Like I said before, the answer is yes, you can collaborate with them, but I don't think that they're going to be able to directly receive funds in like the form of summer salary or something like that. Um, Sorry, I'm trying to keep track of these. Okay, there we go. Do we consider projects that assess natural experiments and interventions not directly related to criminal justice if they are promising for crime prevention and are evaluated for criminal outcomes? That answer would be yes. Like we're interested in criminal justice outcomes is the main thing. How we get to there is sort of there's a whole bunch of different ways. So that answer would be yes. Um, you are allowed to submit 2 different projects with different co-authors. Yes, that is certainly allowed. Are research assistant professors eligible? Uh, it's sort of we've limited this to tenure track professors. So if you are on a tenure track, that would count as yes. If you're in a different sort of situation, why don't you email us at programs@rsage.org? We do know that there are a lot of different institutions and a lot of different ways that people institutions create categories. So the answer is going to be a maybe, unfortunately. How many proposals are we willing to support? We are sort of expecting to fund between 5 and 10 this year. Again, we don't know. This is the first year we're running this program. We don't know how many applications we're going to get. And if a ton of really, really high quality applications come in, we may decide to fund more than we plan to. If a whole bunch of them are above the bar, let's say. But our current estimate is that we're going to fund between 5 and 10. Yes, so we have a question about if you're an assistant professor at a U.S. institution, but you want to run this through another organization. Yes, we can administer grants through other organizations. We may want some details as to why or something like that, but we can talk about that when something gets to that stage. But I would encourage you to apply because you're eligible as an assistant professor. For the question about whether summer salary and a course buyout are supported, or is it one or the other, it's sort of a per PI, we're allowing $15,000 for the year. Sometimes that can be some for summer salary and some for a course buyout. Like I said before, course buyout prices at institutions vary a ton. So it is possible that for some people they can get a course buyout and some summer salary. We have a question about Arnold Ventures. Yes, so essentially this is co-funded with Arnold Ventures, but this is completely separate from all of their funding programs that go directly through them. This one is these are considered completely separate. You're certainly allowed to apply for funding at the Arnold Ventures and for this at the Russell Sage Foundation. If your tenure track position starts in August, yes, you are eligible because that's when funding wouldn't start until next fall anyway. That's really when you would need to have a tenure track position at the latest by is the fall. Yes, associate professors can be co-PIs, but as I mentioned earlier, they cannot receive funding on this. We can support them in other ways like RAs or potentially travel, but definitely not for summer salary or course buyouts for the associate professors. Do co-PIs need to be tenure track? No, just the applying PI. Co-PIs, if they are tenure track, it's great. But if they're an adjunct or a research professor or something like that, they can definitely be on the project as well. That's fine. We have a question about full professors. Currently, we are not allowing full professors to apply for this. We would rather it be junior faculty or junior and mid-career faculty. And a question about the indirects. The 100K budget includes the 15% indirects. So if your university requests the 15% indirects, that means 85,000 in direct costs. Is there a maximum amount that can be dedicated to research assistants? No, we love funding research assistants. I don't think we have any limits. I don't, if we have had a limit, I've never seen it before in any project that we funded. Consulting, I don't think we would fund consulting for an associate co-PI. That I think that would be considered a way of getting around sort of the summer salary restriction. So I would doubt that. And are co-PIs without PhD eligible? So if someone doesn't have a PhD, we would like to see evidence that they've sort of done PhD level work or have a body of peer-reviewed publications or something like that. And then we would consider it. So the answer to whether folks without PhDs can receive funding as co-PIs is sort of an it depends. If they've been publishing and are active researchers at a PhD level, maybe. But usually no. But that's again sort of an it depends. All right, I see we've cleared the question queue. Thank you all for staying on. Like we said, please email us at programs@rsage.org if you have questions that as you're thinking about this over the next month. I will tell you a caveat. If you wait until the day before the deadline for your question, you're going to get a very short answer. But if you email us a couple weeks before the deadline, we'll still be able to give you a pretty good answer. Yeah. Please use that email address. We're here to answer those questions. Some of these things we're still figuring out because this is the first year we're running this. So like I alluded to with the questions about course buyouts and things like that, those questions are helpful because if you don't ask the question, then we don't know to talk about them internally when we're coming up with those policies. So that all of that is really helpful for us to know, so that as we design this, especially if we're thinking about changes we could make for year 2 of this program or something like that. I encourage you to go to our website and sign up for our mailing list. That's the best way to stay abreast of any recent announcements, new deadlines, new programs, etc. Yeah, thanks all for sticking with us for this webinar. We will be posting this recording on the website in the next couple of days.